Good evening, everyone. I am Mustansar Siam from Pakistan, and Farah Adeed has joined me from United States to discuss state of press and academic freedom, religious intolerance, and minorities in Pakistan. Farah Adeed is a graduate research fellow at San Diego State University, USA. He frequently writes for American Academy of Religion, Dawn, Acton Institute, and Express Tribune. Thank you so much, Farah Adeed, for your time.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Nasser.
So my first question to you is, how significant is academic freedom for a vibrant society, critical thinking, and growth of democracy?
This is a very important question. I think this is very important and least understood in several Muslim majority countries in a way that it is not understood in a way that what is the relationship between freedom and democracy, or between freedom and development or growth. So generally, and the part of the reason is that it has been an argument in Pakistan that Pakistan has been making progress under authoritarian or dictatorial regimes. So it gives an impression that creativity has nothing to do with economic development or economic growth. And these days, the Chinese model or Southeast Asian model has been once in place to create an impression that there is no relationship between growth, development, and creativity. But as a matter of fact, there is a deep relationship between the creativity and between freedom. So freedom actually is something that creates the particular settings and structural conditions where different ideas come into play. And those different ideas lead societies toward creativity and development and growth and sustainability. And in Muslim history, there is a contestation between the two ideas, that whether Muslims were more religious when they were dominating the world, or whether they were more open and emancipated at that time. So the general accepted fundamentalist argument is that they were more committed to their religion. That was the reason they were rising in science and they were rising in other aspects of the world. But as a matter of fact, that a significant amount of research indicates at the moment now that from 8th to 11th and 10th centuries, Muslims were free, comparative in a very comparative sense, like in comparison to Western Europe of that time. And they were free, they were kind of liberal, and there was a kind of distinction between the religious authority and the state authority, which actually allowed scholars, entrepreneurs, and everyone to play with ideas, to create economic opportunities, to create ideas, to defend the very idea of economic creativity. And that was the overall context in which Muslims grew up, and they were able to dominate the world. So there is a connection between the level of creativity and level of development in any society.
Okay. Second question is, why the current state of academic freedom in Pakistan is marginalized and suppressed? What have been the ramifications of this marginalization on political discourses and free thinking?
This is very important, and I think the relationship between academic freedom and political freedom is quite obvious. There can be no academic freedom if there is no political freedom, because it is difficult to create a distinction that here it is an academic freedom and it is political freedom, because scholars in schools, in universities particularly, they are often accused of I just wanted to say something. I don't know if it is appropriate or not, but for example, the recent case against former Prime Minister Imran Khan, the court is going to hear today. It is quite disturbing to me as a defender of freedom, as someone who believes in freedom, that uh, five-member bench is going to hear a case about contempt of court against the foreign prime minister. Honestly, like I have nothing more to say about it, but I have nothing like I, I feel quite uh, speechless. I feel like what is going on? Why it is so important? So why I give this example is that this creates a psychological impact in universities elsewhere, that how much you are free, what is the limits of freedom. So academic freedom in Pakistan has been suppressed because of lack of political freedom. And conversely, there has been compromised academia. As a result, we were not able to create an inclusive public sphere, which is important for mediating between the state and society. So as a result, we failed democracy because there is significant amount of scholarship on the idea that the coffee shops, internet cafes, intellectual circles, these bodies create a kind of narrative which is important for the survival of democracy. Our academia badly failed. One thing, and then so I'm focusing on the political aspect of that. There are also religious challenges, and I hope you will touch upon these religious challenges to freedom in Pakistan. So I will talk about that too.
Okay. In your view, how the academic freedom in Pakistan can be restored and can be rethink, considering the view held by many that an unfettered academic freedom can challenge and undermine state narrative owing to the plural composition of society?
Um, so I'm not very pessimist about that, but as they say, facts are facts. In the current Pakistani political setup, I think it will be a little too much to think about genuine academic freedom. Of course, one can talk about an evolutionary process, and that there are attempts being made by the scholars to get freedom. But I'm very skeptical of those developments and those processes, because I'm not sure if we are moving toward more freedom or we are going back to less freedom. And this is an open question, because I'm not sure. I'm very skeptical of the thesis that we are probably moving in the right direction where there is more freedom for academia. So um, um, so as a matter of fact, it is hard to say something about the nature of academic freedom and its restoration in the current political system, because everyone knows there are some institutions, there are some forces in Pakistan, there are even some powerful individuals who control the narratives and media and everything. So uh, I don't want to sound too pessimistic about that, but as a matter of opinion, I don't see in immediate future revival or restoration of academic freedom in Pakistan because of lack of political freedom, lack of political stability. Because as a matter of fact, I don't see any political stability in Pakistan in the coming years.
Okay. World Press Freedom Index ranks Pakistan 157 out of 180 countries. And the governments, be it PTI, PMLN, try to censor any criticism of their policies. In your view, why are governments not reluctant to propagate narratives which do not appeal them?
Honestly, Mustansar, the problem is that our political parties, be it PTI, PML, and PPP, they have always been supported by someone when they were in power. And that someone is never confident enough to, to stand in front of public or to face criticism, because that someone is never trained to face criticism. They are trained to neutralize the target. And they see anyone who disagrees with them as an enemy. There can be no negotiation unless the enemy is in a powerful position. An enemy can create and can inflict more kind of like they can inflict more distraction you, then you feel like there can be a negotiation. Otherwise, enemy, let's neutralize it. So because of that nexus between that someone and these political parties, it creates kind of insecurity that I know someone as like some media persons in Pakistan personally that they were um, they were not given like freedom, or they did not have freedom when Prime Minister Imran Khan was in government. Former Prime Minister was in government. So it is hard to say that only politicians are responsible for that. I think that someone who actually um, always supports or is always in alliance with these political forces, they're responsible and they're not confident enough and they're not trained enough to face media. So they are always like, either you run the positive reporting, otherwise you don't report. So, and I'm really not surprised to see what is happening right now in Pakistan, or what the these figures as you have shared with me. I'm not surprised to see that.
Okay. What are your views on recent developments, the ban on PTI chairman Imran Khan and the cancellation of ARY license? What could have been the mechanism to handle if a channel or a person becomes an issue for the prevailing social or political order?
So this is very interesting. For many people, it is like mindless to ban Imran Khan, to cancel the license of ARY. But it was not mindless. It has always been the same case. Like though that someone has always been using raw power to neutralize the target. This is how they do. This
Exactly.
is how they are trained to do. So you don't expect like wise, well articulated policy which gets executed through institutional mechanisms. It is not the case. They just use raw power to achieve their immediate objectives. They don't care about its implications or about its impact on their institution or the public discourse at large. So I also, that was my criticism of that someone, but honestly speaking, it is very unfortunate to ban Imran Khan. And I think Islamabad High Court has recently suspended the notification and allowed Imran Khan to appear on television.
Exactly. Okay. What are the reasons behind the rising religious intolerance in Pakistan? What factors are actually making Pakistani society more radicalized?
So this is very important, and I think I'm developing a kind of different understanding of these issues now. So in the West, there was a perception, there has been a perception that this increasing rise of intolerance and religious fundamentalism and Islamic extremism in Pakistan is because of religious reasons. Now I am very skeptical of this understanding, because I think these political groups or religious groups are always used by certain groups in Pakistan, by certain forces in Pakistan, as and when needed. There was a time when those forces needed these groups as jihadis, they made them jihadis. Now they need some groups to block roads, to create pressure on the political forces to achieve to seek some concessions. They do it. So I kind of feel religion is used to achieve some political purposes, objectives. And here is the distinction, that those objectives or political goals are not inherently objectives or interests of that very group that is For example, let me give you an example of Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, the TLP. Sometimes they protest. So when they are protesting, they are told that you are defending your interest. But in reality, they are defending someone else's interest when they are on the roads. Because we have now seen that there have been some developments when TLP was silent. Although we were expecting that they will speak up and they will come on the roads, but so we are now convinced enough that they come on roads and they block roads when they are needed, when there is a need to bring them on the road. So the rising religious intolerance is not just because of religious intolerance. It is because of changing political preferences. It is because of changing political interests and objectives of certain groups and segments in Pakistan who always use who. So I was recently speaking to someone in Pakistan. He is from Islamabad, and he's a scholar. That person told me that Pakistani establishment always have one powerful pressure group, and they always use that special powerful group to seek concessions from political governments. And
Exactly.
then he gave me several examples, and I was pretty convinced that yeah, it is true that they always have someone in their hand and they use it when and as needed.
Exactly. The state of minorities in Pakistan is troubling. The cases of forced conversions are increasing, and there are convictions of blasphemy, lynching, and so on. In your view, to what extent religious minorities, including Shias and Ahmadis, are the victims of discrimination and human rights violations?
So um, this is true that religious minorities face issues in Pakistan. For example, recently an Ahmadi man was killed for just being an Ahmadi. There is no doubt that uh, members of Shia community are generally targeted by Sunni extremists, and vice versa. Some members of Shia community are also they also target the members of Sunni community. Um, I think so. The reason I think is the overall context and environment which has been created in Pakistan, that it it made minorities face insecure, but at the same time it also made majority insecure. I recently did an essay for the Acton Institute where my main argument was that blasphemy law is used against religious minorities, true, but it is also used against the majority. Many people who have been lynched and many people who are facing blasphemy charges are Sunni Muslims.
Exactly.
They're faithful Sunni Muslims, but they are facing blasphemy charges because we have created a structure. We're not just minorities, the religious minorities are persecuted, but also majority has to face the music because this is a fundamental principle which we are talking about the freedom, that threat to freedom anywhere is a threat to freedom everywhere.
Everywhere. Exactly.
So if freedom of minorities is threatened, majority should think about their freedom, because when principles are compromised, then the overall structure of free society stands compromised. So I agree and I understand that religious minorities are facing unprecedented issues in Pakistan at the moment because of the rise of DLP and all that. But at the same time, there is not a very ideal situation for free thinkers, for uh, progressive and liberal Muslims, even for ordinary Muslims, because they are also sometimes accused of blasphemy and all that. So that is the overall context in Pakistan. And I absolutely not say that this is just because of religion or its misleading interpretations. No, this is more about politics. This is more about the control of Pakistani establishment over discourse making and over academia that has created more problems than these religious groups have created otherwise.
Exactly. Interesting. My last question is, considering all these issues related to persecution of minorities in Pakistan, where does the actual problem lie and what needs to be done to wipe out such grave human rights violations?
So, what needs to be done? Um, this is very interesting and very tricky. Um, I think the real change is when the change is from the bottom, because as historical evidence suggests that the changes which are imposed by the state are generally counterproductive. We have an example of Iran, we have an example of Afghanistan, we have an example of Turkey, we have an example of Pakistan under Ziaul Haq, that all the state policies, whether Islamization or modernization by the state, they tend to be counterproductive because there is no wider public ownership or acceptability of those values. So one, I believe there has to be a bottom-up approach where people like yourself, uh, public intellectuals, scholars, writers, columnists, poets, poets are very important, that they promote an idea of a free society. So by free society, I do not mean a society without religion. I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is that a free society where nobody is persecuted for having different belief system, and nobody is persecuted for being a different Muslim, because there are many different ways to be a Muslim. So, and even if someone is not Muslim, that person is not persecuted for their beliefs. So, for that reason, there has to be a revolution through an evolution from the bottom top approach. And the last thing we could do is that um, we need to have a vibrant, dynamic civil society, which is important. I have been arguing this in different talks that current Pakistani so-called civil society has like generally lost the credibility. Some of our, most of our senior journalists, they tweet something in favor of a government, and when there is another government, they oppose the same thing. And on Twitter, people just grab their screenshots and they're like, here we go. So you lose the credibility. When once you lose the credibility, nobody is going to listen to you. So there has to be a principled civil society. For that, I think the bigger role, the responsibility lies on the shoulders of academia, professors. Last thing I just wanted to say is maybe it is out of context, but scholars educated from the Western world, from the United Kingdom, from the United States, they need to be more humble in Pakistan. Uh, they could have done a lot for Pakistan. They would have helped create a very genuine, free, equal society had they not behaved the way they behave. Uh, in the Western world, nobody behaves like some professors in public sector universities behave, particularly when they have some degrees from the West. Uh, for example, it becomes very challenging, oftentimes, not always, there are exceptions. It becomes very challenging if your professor in public sector university has unfortunately a degree from the United States. It is very difficult to approach that person. It is very difficult to speak to him. It is very difficult to be on the way when that person is moving around, because the person has a master or PhD from the United States.
Exactly.
So I and this idea of authority and subordination, it has long-term implications.
Exactly.
It has implications which these men and women in mostly public sector universities don't care about, because and the interesting thing is that in this Western environment, nobody cares about that. And I really feel that this is what it means to be a free society. not a ghulam, not a slave community. So I think they have their responsibility who study here in the US or in the UK, and they go back, they should promote a more humane version of education and professorship and freedom and all that. And this is all what I have to say.
Thank you so much, Farah Adeed, for your time. I really appreciate you coming on for this short interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you.